And it turns out I was muted. So one final fun technical difficulty that we just lived through was the fact that I forgot to unmute my microphone while getting things set up. So we did run into some technical difficulties. Thank you again. I was just saying, thank everybody for kind of bearing with me while we got everything set up for the evening here. Ran into a few technical difficulties at the start. We're all good to go now. Obviously, we've been playing some retro RPGs. We've been doing some Ghost of Tsushima. We've been doing a lot of things on the channel, a lot of video games, and I wanted to do something a little bit different than we've been doing, and I want to talk about live action role playing, and I actually want to tell stories from it. Right now, obviously, during the pandemic, you can't go out live action role playing. You can't slay dragons and ride on airships, go on quests, hang out with hundreds of people because we are in plague season, as everybody knows. So we can't have gatherings of that size, at least not here in America. So instead of living that. And once we can go back, I plan on taking out a stream pack and kind of actually live streaming LARP. But for now, I'm going to tell stories from LARP, give you kind of tales, different things that I've lived over the years, do it with a little bit of a bardic flair for the evening. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to tell tales. I have a basic theme for the initial tales, and that's small victories. I have been playing LARP for really closing on now 25 years. I've seen kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall, many wars wage, so many changes. I have risen to be king. I have ruled as monarch. I've elevated to duke. I'm one of only three people ever sainted by my kingdom. But we're not telling grand stories. We're going to save grand stories for another time. I think it's important we start with the most important stories of all, the small victories, because small victories what eventually lead to grand adventures. But the small victories are what's important. So it looks like everybody can hear me now, which is really great. So we're going to kind of just start off with a little bit of an anecdotal uh, story to start the evening that really kind of gets home the idea of small victories. So to tell this tale, I must first explain to you the knight I am speaking of. This tale features a knight by the name of Sir Derek Roth. Derek Roth stands 6'3". He towers over many on the field. He is a wide wingspan. He has reach for days. He is mostly legs. He moves with the speed and the grace of a gazelle. Oh, thank you for following, Niplin. Uh, and he has been at the top of his game. He is still winning tournaments. He is still dominating the field. He is tactically leading. He has not missed a beat. He has been 3 decades deep being one of the best fighters. He has evolved from his 20s to his 30s to his 40s. He may have gotten more treacherous. He may have gotten more smart about the way he fights, but he is just as deadly now as he was in his youth, and that is a very rare thing. Uh, all of us eventually weather from time, but there's only very few fighters in our game who can dominate as long as he can. The reason I need to speak of this is 6'3". This is about 15 years ago. He had not slowed even a bit. His knees were still in probably okay shape. And he was visiting my land. My land, my homeland, is a place called the Mithril Hills. There's a place where dwarves mine mithril for the kingdom. It is a place of adventure, of treachery. It used to be at one point the heart of the kingdom I reside, Blackspire. It is now the southernmost tip and port town of a neighboring kingdom to the north. But at this time, we were grand in a duchy. The white walls of the city stood tall. People would come from all around. Um, in the mundane realm, in the world we come from, the area we're talking about is Washington and Oregon in the states, the Pacific Northwest. People would travel from the southern parts of Oregon, the top of Washington, from all around, just to come to Mithril Hills to see the beautiful walls, to bask in the arts and sciences, a place of learning, very similar to Athens in Old Greek at this time, long before the fall of Mithril Hills. This was, and Derek was there plying his trade. That trade, of course, is murder. Um, a fighter from our field, a man raised in the dark arts, an assassin, but also a face-to-face fighter of some renown, though not a warlord, not a knight, not not known for his valor, but definitely still somebody you would not want to fight. Uh, Abaddon, someone who had been named after one of the fiends, the demons, the devils of hell itself. Um, and he strode out, but he had a plan. Let's see, in a one-on-one combat, there's a very low percent chance that Abaddon would get the victory on the field. However, he had a friend, Adam. Now, Adam was a dwarf. And when I say dwarf, I don't mean big bushy beards, pickaxes, and Gimli. What I'm talking about is a really fine man, a good fighter, a dagger master in his own right, with dwarfism. And this human man with dwarfism stood just shy of 4 feet. So, really contrary in size. At best, if he faced Derek Roth on the fields, he may get a shin, he would occasionally get a leg, but most of the time he would find himself bested on the fields of valor. But not this day. For what happened this day is Abaddon grabbed his mighty heater shield, 2 feet wide and 4 feet long, a massive shield. Usually a shield like this you would never take to one-on-one combat because it restricts the movement of your sword. Derek Roth himself fights with a buckler, a small shield, a shield older than many people within our kingdom. Uh, and he fights with 2 short swords, just small 36-inch gladiuses. Thanks for following, Minerva. And so he's fast and he's to be reckoned with, as I said. But as he was approaching, besting person after person, the best fighters in our land wanting to test their mettle against the ageless warrior of Derek Roth, uh, Abaddon placed his knee on the ground and he planted his big steel heater firm into the earth. And coming up from the bushes behind, unbeknownst to Derek Roth, Adam, with his small little daggers, put himself between Abaddon and the shield in that small space between the body and the shield. And Derek Roth approached, a smirk on his face. And another thing you must know about Sir Derek Roth is he's as renowned with the pen as he is with the sword, and he can kill you with a quip as easily as he can kill you with his blade. So Derek comes up, a smirk on his face, his sword's glinting in the sun, and he sees this man on a knee, and he says, "Rise, fight me. I want you at your best." Derek is not one to take fights easy. He needs them at their full strength. This is not somebody who is known for 3 decades as a warlord because he takes the easy way. But Abaddon said, "No, it's a new technique, one you have not seen before, and I will best you with it." Derek smirked again, shrugged, positioned himself, his body pulled back well out of the range of Abaddon's longsword, his arms, knowing their range, keeping themselves at bay as he paced back and forth, moving kind of like water flows in and out, a tide ebbs and flows closer and closer to Abaddon. Abaddon swung his blade wildly. Derek saw his moment. Derek lunged forward like a cheetah pouncing on his prey, but just at that moment, Abaddon, even knowing his own defeat, burst his shield forward, and out pops Adam. Adam, with his 2 daggers, scurries forth. Derek, not even realizing what has happened in this moment, thinking Abaddon simply gave him a free win, feels 2 blades against his shins, and he realizes he has been defeated. But how could Abaddon defeat him? He only has 1 arm and 1 sword, and Derek sees clearly where that sword is. And he looks down and he sees Adam, barely 4 feet tall, at least 2.5 feet shorter than him, smiling up, his face beaming. This man who had tried to best the best in all the land for ages and ages. And Derek knew he'd been beat. He knew he'd been beat with treachery, without honor. No one would sing tales, well, at least not until this day, of this victory. But, Derek knew the importance of getting a win, but he couldn't help himself. As he looked down, placing his sword in the sheath to walk from the tournament grounds, he said to Adam, "It's best to treasure these small victories." Um, so now that is kind of the tone I want to set is small victories. Now this is a funny situation. In terms of the LARP, for those who might be turning in right now that do not do live action role playing, the game we are playing is Amped Guard. It's one of many phone fighting games, but the one I've played the most, the one I've been in for 24 years, is that one. So most of my tales will come from this LARP, but I do have some from others. Um, But what's important to know is what you actually would have seen on the field that day. I think it's important for people who don't LARP to know is the mighty steel shields and the glinting swords are actually made of a kite spar, like you'd fly a big professional kite. So just half-inch kite spar, and they're in pipe insulation foam with cloth and clear tape. So these are foam swords. They look almost like clubs. Some are made to look like flat blades and axes, but at the end of the day, they're foam swords. And the shields themselves are built out of pure foam. Nonetheless, when you're in battle, when you're at LARP, for those who don't LARP to know, um, it's important to know when you're on the field, when you're there, it is a realm of imagination, and you feel the tournament feels, you feel the quests. Uh, the dragon may just be a couple people with latex masks and green cloth on their bodies, but when you're in the middle of LARP, that's a dragon and you feel its breath and your mind just kind of takes over like it does when you read a great book, um, or you hear a tale and you just kind of go with it. And so what may appear to the uninitiated, those who haven't tried LARP or might not be interested in LARP, they may just go by a park and see, you know, a bunch of people, um, all genders, all ages, all races, all welcome to fight. But they'll see them out on the field, wearing garments of old and fantasy clothes, latex ears, wielding these foam weapons, and they see teenagers and they see old men all out there doing this thing, and they probably think it's a little bit weird. And to be honest, I'm not going to lie, it is a little bit weird. It's quite a bit nerdy, but when we're out there, and that's where the passion's with me still to this day, you can imagine yourself in an epic tale. I did want to give people an idea of garb, so bear with me. I'm just going to stand up so you can kind of get an idea of. Those are my dogs. They're telling tales as well. So long tunics of linen and things like that is what people would wear at LARPs. For those who are in the chat who haven't done LARPs, I do want to kind of move on to my next story. But if anybody wants to like ask any questions or has any comments in chat, I'm really happy to kind of talk with chat. Thanks for the tunic. It's really nice. It's lightweight. It actually keeps me warm in the winter, but it keeps me cool in the summer. It's a good medium weight linen. It's like wearing a Egyptian cotton bed sheet almost. And then the octopus is my personal sigil. Um, who is the best at Amp That is really hard to say. So in our LARP in Amtgard, a lot of LARPs have different paths and things. Eris feels she is the best at Amtgard, but honestly, everybody is kind of the best. Minerva says Critias is the best, and I am inclined to agree that Critias is one of, if not the best. Juicebox Hero says that Critias is not the. Yeah, I think Critias is. I love that little man. He's not little. He's actually pretty tall, but uh, yeah. So. Just one second. I need to put my microphone on mute. I need to take a real quick drink of my water. One moment. So, thanks for giving me a moment to kind of take a drink of water. Um, so I do want to. I'm going to pull up some more tales that I want to tell to everybody this evening. So let me get those pulled up real quick, and I will move on to my next stories. Okay. So anyway, yeah. So just to go back to who is the best in Amp I didn't really get around to answering it. Kind of everybody in a way is the best. There's no true way to be the best because when it comes to AmpCard, there's so many things you can do. We have so many paths. You have people who get honored as griffins, and these are people who are honored, encouraged, and chivalrous. You get people who are recognized for their amazing role play portrayal of monsters. You have people like Sir Derek Roth, who is a fighter. Um, and you have artisans who make beautiful tunics like I'm wearing, but everything keeps kind of evolving over the years. And as some people kind of wean or wane out, others come in, and there's no one who's ever the best at any one given time. Um, so the best at something is arguable also because you can go into a tournament. Just kind of go back to Critias. You can go to a tournament, and the dominant force that day, with all the warlords and other best fighters on the field, Critias best at a tournament. Uh, you roll forward to the very next tournament, though, and Big Mac Elkhart is on the field. And this time, instead of Critias coming out in the tournament, he wins. And the next tournament, it could be Big Mac again. It could be Critias. It could be Matty Hellsfire. It could be one of the warlords. Warlord is a term we use to honor the best fighters. They've won the grandest tournaments the most, and they have proven their dominance. It's a term for specific one-on-one combat prowess with it in our game. Matty is also one of my favorite. That kid is a grinder. But I mean, if we're talking about best in terms of fighting, I don't want to get too much in the weeds. I want to tell more stories. Um, but I'll tell stories about most people. There's a lot of people though who could be argued the best and could trade any day. And one will pull ahead for a while. Back in the day, Sir Robin pulled ahead, but then right on his tails was Sir Dogboy. So, and that's just in fighting. Again, there's people who make armor. I would say Unum is the best at armor. So yeah, no one is really the best at all of Amped Guard. But if I did have to pick one person that was the best at Amp Guard, if you're people who play Amp Guard or people who want to look into Amp Guard, I would say the best at Amp Guard is Sir Delos. He is primarily a fighter, but I think he has done so much to promote travel and fighting and education around the game. I think my personal top pick for the current best at Amp Guard in the years 2019 and 2020, I would say Sir Delos is the best overall at just the spirit and love of Amp Guard. So let's go ahead and move on to the next story. I'm glad I could kind of like talk about LARP a little bit. The next tale in our small victories is about a war. So, like I said, the kingdoms I reside in right now is called the Kingdom of Black Spire. We have a kingdom to our north, what would be Washington in the mundane realms known as Northern Lights. And then over on the eastern side and up into Canada, you have a kingdom called Viridian Outlands. Now, these three kingdoms are in distinct geographic regions. It makes sense. They have borders, they have mountains and rivers that divide them. However, back in the day, we're going to roll back really far now, 2 decades, there was much more turmoil in these lands. Lands intermix with each other. When I came into these realms, um, the kingdoms were split into three. Mithril Hills that I spoke of before was known just as the Dark Valley. That is, again, where I originally called my home. I'm one of the ones who built the Mithril cities, helped build the walls that would later crumble to dust and leave it the shell it is today, compared to the when it was one of the grandest duchies around. But at this time, we were under the Celestial Kingdoms. We were governed um, as a sovereign colony far away from them, who resided far to the south um, in an area in the Mundane Realms you would know as Texas. Um, and there was two kingdoms in Oregon itself, the Kingdom of the Mystic Seas, which was huge in its own right. It was most of their members and their power resided in one true heart of the Mystic Seas, but they did have great lands like Sylvan Fen, where Belnorn and the Grumpiest Gus come from under them. They did have some satellite lands. Um, and then VSR was these other lands all around. So there was a lot of animosity from the split when the fracture happened. Much like the real world, there was arguments of government that caused the split to happen. Uh, Valley of the Silver Rains, VSR, they believed in a floating crown. A floating crown meant anyone could rise to govern the lands. Anyone could ascend to the regency. Anyone could become the monarch from any of the lands. Mystic Seas, the first kingdom up here, the first land, believed in a static crown. They believed if you wanted to rule, if you wanted to govern, you must travel to them. And their sheer massive size, even when Valley of the Silver Rains split off, was such that they could easily self-govern from this one place. Um, So to their credit, and lands started to spring also to the north, and they would come under Mystic Seas. But again, it was all interspersed. You would have, if you look at the Mundane Realm in the state of Oregon, you would have Mystic Seas in Portland, but you'd have a small outpost of the Valley of the Silver Rains just 20 miles south. Um, and the reason I bring up all these fractures is it stopped being fractured into three before the story I tell, and the Dark Valley and Golden Glades, they had come to rest um, back under the Valley of the Silver Rains. Um, and Mystic Seas, still a seat of power with their satellite lands. They decided to host a battle, an honorary battle. I mean, it was a way to exact revenge on these upstarts who had broken off these colonies who had decided to make themselves self-governing. But they called it the Great Northwest War. This would later become known as Pac War, and you will hear me talk about Pac War, Pacific War, many times in stories and days and times I tell stories to come. But it's now become more of a celebration. It's a celebration of our past when we were divided, celebrated our coming together, because eventually we would all unify in Oregon under one banner. But back then, the animosity was still hot. If you were the best fighter in Black Spire or in Valley of Silver Rains, uh, you would have people who couldn't hold a torch to you refer to you as scum, not worthy of their tournament fields. And likewise, if an artisan from Mystic Seas would venture into the Valley of Silver Rains, despite the beauty of their art being easy to behold to any commoner, uh, they would be talked down upon as if they were not nearly as skilled. There was a lot of animosity. The split seemed amicable, but never really was. Um, so the first Great Northwest Wars were held, fights were had, and the event just grew. Um, we're, we've had over 20 of them now, but at this time I'm talking about Pacific War II, nestled in a field between the two kingdoms, a massive land. And I had shown up here as a member of the Valley of Silver Rains. We had tried to amass our armies. We knew we outnumbered them. In terms of population, we had more people. We had more soldiers. We had more fighters. Perhaps their fighters on a tournament field would best us, but on the field of battle, in a group conflict, there's only so much damage one person can do if your tactics are sound. However, as I walked the encampments, as I met Belnorn, I met Gustav, I met a number of people I would later become friends, have many adventures with, but they were on the other side of the war. But at night, it was a revelry the night before. No animosity, truce. I was too young at this point to drink, but that didn't mean I could not go and speak with others and talk to friends, make new friends. And I was so young in Valley Silver Rains, and I hadn't traveled enough to look at these 200 people. These 200 people gathered for this war, and not just assume the sides were, at least, if not in our favor, equal. And then the armies started lining up the next day. 17 of us in unison marched out to the field. The mighty King Galen, stout with beard, reminiscent of Santa Claus if Santa Claus wielded a 20-ton hammer that could crush the gods. So, like a Viking Santa Claus in a lot of ways, a big dwarven man led us to the field. We brought our best warlord, Sir Asherala, much like Derek Roth, tall, lanky, with speed. They and then they came to the field, and at first there was 5, and then there was 10, and then there was 20. And then we were at 19, just shy of 20, and we're like, where's everybody else? Well, they did that to mock us, because not a single other soul would set foot on the side of the Valley of the Silver Rains. No, fear had won out. Remembrances of past wars had won out. Remembrances that we split off from them, and even though we were independent, they were still the people who were our original birth sovereignty. And those militias I talked about were at home and they were drunk. Um, and there we stood. When you took out all the non combatants, the field medics, the water bearers, those who had simply traveled hundreds of miles in the hot sun just to see the conflict, sat behind Mystic Seas. Mystic Seas' army numbered at least 150 people. Now, I am a bard. I do embellish my tales. It's better for a tale, but not on this one. I can't embellish my tale too much. They stood 150 strong. It was counted, it was known. It could have been just shy of 150 or just over, but it was 150 strong, and we were 19. There was no way this war could be won. But Galen had a tactical mind, and he gathered to him his knights, Asheral, and they held council. And I wasn't a squire, I wasn't a page. I was an orphan boy who had been brought up by Sir Raven to be an assassin, but even that wasn't known. So for all they knew, I was just a humble farmhand who had been conscripted in the army. So I was not privy to the tactics. So we went out and they said, form around Sir Ash. He will lead you out. And there's only 4 of us with Ash, leaving 15 behind. And we're like, I guess we are to be sacrificed. Maybe they are to ask for a truce. And then marching forth on their side, Ash flanked by just a couple of us farm hands, rolled Derek Roth, as I mentioned before, even more in his youth. Um, and while he's always, again, been dominant over 3 decades, I would say this was an era he was at his most vicious. This was not when he was dishonorable, not in tournament, not on the proving grounds, but in war. Oh, Derek Roth could destroy anybody with tactics, but he wasn't alone. He wasn't flanked by farmhands. No, he was flanked by warlords. He was flanked by the force of the North, Maurice, who inspired the best fighters we've had on the field. Maurice, who had nicknames like Force from the North or the Whirlwind. He fought with Two Blades Florentine and he could block a dozen men. It was like watching an action movie when he fought. It was unreal how many people he could kill alone. He's also flanked by just large, large, and just destructive forces like Sir Ursur, who wielded a polearm, just a mighty glaive, and night after night in a flying V formation almost marched force with Derek Roth leading those armies all these knights, and you looked at their belts, and there's a distinguisher you should look for if you're ever in the realms of Amtgard, and that is a knight's belt is white, but what they wear on it really distinguishes a special characteristic. The White Phoenix is someone as a paladin sworn to valor and courage, protection, healing, leadership. Some knights wear a Black Phoenix, and that Black Phoenix is anti-paladin. It's the other side of the coin some knights choose to bear, and instead of healing, it's killing. And in fact, it's literally sucking the life force from others. And they marched out there, Black Phoenix after Black Phoenix, armor and warlords and their best fighters. But Ash said, after talking, fine, you know you have us beat. I challenge you. Let me let me see how many of you I can best. I know once I'm down, you will suck out my life force. It'll take months for my healers to bring me back if they can at all. I know I stand here a dead man. But give me this. We at least came to your fields outnumbered. We still stand here. We did not run. Let me fight you one on one, and then do as you will to my kingdom. And I thought, what treachery. Ash is trying to claim some glory before death so he can have stories. He's left our bearded dwarven king behind. He's betrayed whatever plans they made. And he does. And Ash squares up. And that they make a mockery, as I said earlier. And the reason I brought that up is they make a mockery of our fighters. Our fighters are worse than theirs. Their worst is better than our best. So the knights, they call out their squires, the people they're training, they call out their pages, and they have them come over and they go, you can't fight me until you best my squire. If you can take out her, if you can kill him, if you kill the 2 of these, then maybe, Ash, maybe we'll give you what you want. And Ash looked sad, but did it. And despite what those people may say, Ash was very good. Especially in this era, his knees were still together. He had not suffered grievous injuries that would decimate his ability to fight at this level. And he did. And he killed their pages, and he killed their squires. And eventually they stopped having him just go through their squires. This isn't martial arts. This isn't one by one from our worst to our best through the dojo. No, he kind of made a mockery of those knights because they really thought their squires could win. But even if Ash wasn't as good as them, he was better than their squires because we were much closer in skill than people would have you believe, as I said. So they square a knight up against him. Not a sword knight, but a very good fighter. And Ash fights, but as he's fighting differently than I've seen him. Ash was known for flurries and speed. He fought Florentines, like I mentioned, Maurice did, though never on the same caliber as Maurice, still quite good. But he usually used his offense and his speed to overtake his foes. But here he was blocking. It was almost like his strikes were intended for the other sword. And since he was fighting somebody with a sword and a shield, he had two swords. He just used his swords to move around this person and position them. And the fight drug on. And it drug on. And it drug on. And eventually he dispatched the person. And they were tired of this game now. They knew that Ash was having some fun with them. So they sent not the leader, not Derek Roth. They sent Maurice, the best of the best at this time, the force of the North, the giant who walks among us, Maurice the whirlwind, the tornado of death. And though Ash did try the same tactic of stalling, Maurice with his two swords was just too good, his footwork too good. He outmaneuvered, outdanced Ash in a flurry of blades, steel, and blood. He dispatched Ash. Ash took a knee, knowing he was defeated. And I do want to stop off to the side where I see Synthad said he was a really nice guy. Off the field, Maurice is the nicest human being you will ever meet inside or outside of our realms. He is pleasure to be around. He will teach you. He will give you the shirt off his back. He is a joy. On the field, he is a beast, and there is no mercy. Only death when you stand before him, unless you are truly the best of the best. Anyway, Ash had been defeated. They laughed. The knights didn't want us. We were farmhands. They said, go back to your army. Let them know we marched to kill them. Mystic Seas' anti-paladins, their dark forces, walked back. They gathered their troops. They knew they didn't have to send their best. They had us outnumbered, and they moved forward. Now, something you need to know is in these times, the gods saw how much damage, how much anger humans had wrought on the lands, and they had sealed away our powers. So for the longest time, our magic is strong, but never as strong as it was during the Sixth Era. So there's something that happened as they marched forward. Galen bellowed, now. The entire army, we were running back, and we had already run past them because we were not going to stand to die after watching Ash defeated. Everybody else stood back. One lone man, Sir Syke, the greatest wizard at the time in all our realm, finished his dark incants, the red evil energy swirling around him, the skies darkening above him. And he cast a spell simply known by no magical name, no fun Harry Potter incant. No, this was called Doomsday. And at the time, the spell could tear swashes through kingdoms, and it did. For only those who knew how to resist death magic or had been enchanted against it could resist it. And the waves of death rushed over their armies. Now, anti-paladins and paladins at this time both were immune. Monks are naturally immune. And of course, the healers had made sure the best and their brightest were enchanted. So 50 still stood, but 2/3 of their army was now dead, writhing in pain, wishing for the end. But again, Ash was already defeated. That left 18 of us, 18 against 50. And I would love to tell you this is a story of how treachery and Doomsday won out. I'd love to tell you, but that wouldn't be a small victory. No. We marched forth. That anti-paladin contingent I told you about, the force of the North, the brute with the glaive, all their best fighters left standing rolled out, and we were defeated. We barely left with our lives, and we left with our lives because if they killed us all and killed our monarch, and not left us with our lives, how could they gloat? They had shown their dominance. They'd shown we were too weak to even field. And within 2 minutes, our army was vanquished. And Galen was forced on that very field to recite some verses I cannot remember, but it basically boiled down to Mystic Seas is the best A number one. The small victory is still there, though, because at the end of the day, while we are licking our wounds and traveling back to our homelands to try to figure out what happened, Galen shared with us, as Galen also lived within the same homeland as me. That was always the tactic. Slow and steady, use Ash as the decoy. Bring a few of us just in case it needed to look a little more official. But that's why his own squires had stayed behind, because the tactic was always a sacrifice play, a Hail Mary pass. And yeah, we lost. And this battle happened decades ago. But still to this day, we've had many wars, and we can say what they were over. We can say what we celebrated. We can talk of the great moments. And some wars were much bigger and more people, and some were much more triumphant. And those are stories I'll tell in the future. But to me, those that were there, even on the other side, will always have to live with the fact that 150 of them stepped out to less than 20 of us, and 2/3 of them lay wounded and unable to fight before they could defeat us. The small victory was there because, like a thorn in the lion's paw, they knew we had outsmarted them. So yeah, that's kind of another small victory story. Kind of take another minute before I kind of move on to another tale, just to see if anybody has any questions or comments or wants to talk about anything. Just to kind of take a moment for the other people here in this wonderful bar with me. Uh, or not, no one has to. You had a good dinner? What'd you have for dinner, old Synth Dad? Oh, really? Nice. That sounds like a really good dinner. Uh, Anybody else have anything really great to eat? Kind of sitting here looking at this tavern behind me. This artwork of a tavern, even though it's just full of alcohol. I find myself actually quite hungry. But I wanted to make sure I was here to tell you the stories. Um, so yeah, yeah. I did find the background. I looked around and found an art. I will. I accidentally closed the page, so I meant to credit the artist. I will make sure on the VOD that I credit the artist. It was free to use. I didn't just steal somebody's art. I make sure I found art that was okay to be used for things like this. But usually I would want to make sure I credit the artist. I do feel a little bit bad. I should have made sure I grabbed, but I will make sure I get that posted when I post the VOD up to YouTube. But I think it just adds a little bit. I couldn't quite get my lighting right. A little fuzzy. um, Thai noodles, nice. Yeah. So yeah, and just kind of, feel like again, I like to tell the facts kind of outside of the stories, just for like what would be on onlookers. When I talk of the gods sealing away our magics within our LARP realms, much like D&D or many other games, obviously ours gets revised. All games get revised over time, and spells like the Doomsday spell were kind of deemed, even though they were super fun, to be a little too game breaking. So that's the gods being the people who revised our rules, removed that powerful incant, which is better for the game. It's more fun. The game is more tactical now. It's just a lot better, kind of like fifth edition. D&D to me is just so much better than like if you look at like second edition D&D. And D. And I know some people with second edition, I'm not shitting on your favorite D&D, but like to me, fifth edition is just such a more fun system for everybody involved. And amp card's kind of at that point now. However, I am grateful we had those spells back then when we did, because we always will have the tale of when the kingdoms were split. That fun little victory, that little victory lap we had. Um, and it'd be many years before we merged after that, but again, it was definitely a good moment. And they really had our numbers so many other times. So but it's the underdog story, and that's what I kind of like about the little victories with the war. It was really the underdog stories. Like we didn't win, but we had a story we could tell and tell and tell. And yeah, they beat us so many times and so many fights and outnumbered us and got our number, but you know, you don't walk in and not root for the underdog. The underdog is fun to root for, even in sports. If you have your favorite, fighter, your favorite team, you're going to root for that. But if you're just kind of up against a lot of people, Rocky Balboa, you got to root for the underdog. So that underdog victory just kind of felt more sweet, um, than if we had actually won the skirmish that day, just because it, it was a thorn in the side, like I said, like a blemish. It's getting that haymaker punch in on a fighter you shouldn't beat. Like it's a great feeling. Um, yeah, I do. Yeah, I guess they are from the good old days. Like I said, I have been LARPing. I've been live action role playing pretty much all my life. I started when I was 13 years old, and I've you know couple or we're getting closer and closer to 25, and I have been uh, been a LARPer more years of my life than I've not been a LARPer. Um, so I do have, I think one more solid tale. I would love to keep telling more stories, but I really just was kind of like a test stream. I just wanted to see how people enjoyed it, if it was something to kind of add to the repertoire, so to speak. So I didn't have as much planned. I could talk forever, and we'll talk a little bit more after the final tale. But this is my third and final tale for basically little victories. For this one, I will go back to the oldest of old days, what I would like to call year one. Like I said, I joined when I was 13. I'm not the tallest person now. I'm only 5'11". But at 13, I was much smaller. I was not the biggest. And Abaddon, who I mentioned earlier in the first tale, we had come to these realms together. He was only slightly older than me at 14. And finally, like, though, like, he was ahead of us in high school, and he was a couple years, 2 years older than me, 1 year older than Abaddon. Shaden also joined with us, and this was back in the year of our Lord 1996, when we were 13, 14, and 15. And since I talked about Abaddon a bit, and I'm the one talking to you now, and I've boasted a few of my accomplishments. It is worth saying in the future, and for those of you who've known him, probably the majority of you who are in my chat that have played Amp unless you've been around for a long time, you probably only know Shaden as a warlord, but not just a warlord, someone who's been a warlord, like I said, which is the top tier of our fighters for, a long time. Shaden is someone who has fought through a number of injuries, has overcome a lot of odds himself, shaded himself to become a warlord later in his career, and I'll tell that story when I tell, um, of rising tides, when we have a night to talk about people achieving their dreams, but just kind of a glimpse at that. Many people wanted to hold Shaden down, not in a bad way. Amp fighting is competitive, it is tournament based. To join the top echelon, in the wise words of the man himself, Ric Flair, to be the man, you have to beat the man. To be the best, you have to beat the best. And there is a show, and I don't know if you can find it anymore. It was a reality show, and it's the best reality show of all time. It's like a LARP reality show, and the best player on this reality show that was like a fantasy quest is called The Quest is a man named Shondo. And I sometimes even think, even though the show's been off the air probably a decade, I wonder what Shondo's up to. Anyway, but Shondo would say, "Steel sharpens steel." So yeah, if you want to get to the top, you have to beat the top, and to be recognized as warlord, you have to win. You either have to win 21 fights in a row against the top competition, multiple brackets, multiple turns, or you have to have major kingdom tournament wins. These are tournaments that people from other kingdoms will travel to. Like these are the tournaments. They call it tournament season. Uh, when there's going to be a lot of tournaments around, and we have them at our camping trips and our big events, but like every single 6 months we hold one war master, one weapon master, and Shaden fought in one of these weapon masters, and everybody had traveled. There's many other things going on. There was discussions of knightings, coronations, outgoing monarchs, rising monarchs, but Derek Roth was there, and as I said, he's never been a slouch on the field. Dog Boy, who was a very recent addition to that echelon of warlord, was there. Cyric, who hadn't gotten his sword belt but had gotten his war. Like you had every top tier fighter save um, Maurice there, but just enough people there. And Shaden had risen up through that tournament and beat all them to become a warlord. I want to bring this up just to kind of set the stage for year one. So in year one, this mighty we start because our tale starts with Shaden. This mighty warrior named Shaden, 15 years of age, but big of muscle. Played sports, lifted weights. I mean, he is the strongest child because at 15 you're still kind of a child, really. You would probably have ever seen. Um, so of course, the strongest brings the biggest weapon, and he hoisted on his first day a 6-foot greatsword, thinking, if I can wield the great sword, then I am the greatest. The greatsword does not make you the greatest. It moves slow. It's hard to fight with. In fact, the only way to really kind of fight with a greatsword is either with really great tactics. Usually, you would use it with a team where your weaknesses are covered up and your strengths. Oh, hey, Unam. Thanks for joining us. Where your strengths would get covered up. So, like, but just as a single weapon. And the reason I bring up Shaden in year one, in month 6 maybe, or just real early in our careers hoisting the sword, is he wanted to be the best. And now he did what one should do if they want to be the best. He would blaze forward. He was a berserker. He would take his weapons. He would try every weapon style. Now, in our land at this time, we had two dynamically opposing forces in the lands. Um, Rest in peace in real life. Sir Solaris. Sir Solaris, one of the greatest paladins, the first person ever bestowed sainthood by the Kingdom of Blackspire, which is an award only 3 have ever gotten, as I mentioned earlier. But he is always was in his day was always a beacon. He stood tall while he wasn't a warlord. You know, he had his fair share of tournaments. He was in the talks, in the consideration for that honor. Um, in his era. He hadn't quite gotten there yet, and he would never quite get there. He'd get just on the precipice of it before his departure from our game, and unfortunately, before he passed. But that's to say, he was no slouch. You know, just because he wasn't the best of the best didn't mean he wasn't still one of the best. But he was a paladin through and through, as I talked about the white and the black birds. Uh, a silver cross shone. He was Solaris Silver Sword, the most like knightly name to ever knight the knight. He taught his squires virtue and honor. They had to fight with honor. They were punished if they did not. You know, he really Arthurian virtues through and through and through. Honor, courage, chivalry. The Griffin may not get you to knighthood. Hey, thanks for following Chaotic Beauty. Get you to, not again, but the Griffin is a very respected award for honor, courage, and chivalry. They are hard to get. They're rarely bestowed upon people, and they're only bestowed on the most honorable, the most courageous, the most valorous of people. And Solaris, at this point, when we joined, our year one was, Solaris's year, like 4. But in 4 years, he had ascended to paladinhood. He had ascended in his fighting, and he had gotten 8 griffins. And even to this day, I don't have 8 griffins, and I've been at it, like I said, almost 25 years. And I need to speak to this honor. His squires fought with this honor. He sought out honorable squires. When I say they were punished for not being honorable, you know, that was the joke. It was to be assumed that he beat the dishonor out of, but really, he would only take to squire. He would only teach the most, chivalrous, the most chivalric of the land. And now he stood as a precipice, a cornerstone of what was called Dark Valley, as I said at this time. One of our leaders. He wasn't in charge, but he was one of the leaders. Um, Now, an opposing force who was not from the Dark Valley, was from Valley of Silverings, but did spend time up there, was another person, the exact opposite of Solaris. They were knighted the same day. Um, they would always talk about how Solaris was knighted 3 minutes sooner. It was uh, anything was a competition between these two, because if there was the most valorous, the most honorable, the most chivalric in the lands of Valley of Silver Rains, there was also the most treacherous, anti-paladin, the most dishonorable, the win at any costs. Doesn't matter if you have to sell your soul to the devils themselves if it means victory. Just vile and evil. He stood the same height as Solaris. Solaris's like jet black mane. His hair was long. He would always have it pulled back into a ponytail. Very well kempt silver chain adorning his neck, emblazoned with the symbols, again, the shining beacon of honor there to help anybody. And this anti-paladin, again, not from our lands, is from the furthest southlands of Valley of Silverlands, at the time, a place known as the Iron Keep. And the Iron Keep still stands today as part of Blackspire. It was another massive land at the time. So you had these two just big lands. But he'd come up here. He had friends up here. He knew people up here. He had people that he had given belts to up here who were his squires. And now this anti-paladin, this antithesis, this person who rose to knighthood at the same time, as if to have somebody so good and so pure in the realm, you had to balance that coin. And this is another person who's no longer, and I'm not going to get into the details. Unfortunately, these are two people who are not with us. Hey, thanks for stopping by, Pyro. These are two people, and thanks for following. These are two people. This is another person who's left for different reasons. But this person was known at the time as Sir Hawk. And again, if Solaris was the beacon and the sun that stood to defend the honor of all, then Hawk was there to burn that temple to the ground. In fact, it seemed like he took delight. He also had um, a relationship with Galen. Galen was the person who would be king in my war story I told earlier, and Galen the mighty dwarf, the big white beard, and he's had that his whole life. He mined the mountains. He's slain dragons single-handedly with his hammer. Well, he was a dwarf though, so not known as good or evil. And if you know D&D, I guess lawful neutral, but he was a friend to the people. Galen was someone who took me under the wing day one. He was definitely a builder of his people, and he was a leader. But there's still, anonymity between him and Hawk. For while Solaris had been knighted 3 minutes sooner, had ascended to, oh, there's my dogs, they're telling their own stories, had ascended to knighthood 3 minutes. Just 1 second. I'm going to have to put this on a real quick standby. I'm sorry, my dogs are really going. I did it again. I did not unmute myself. Sorry about the dogs. That's what I said. I was saying, sorry for the green undercoat. I was explaining I was having some difficulties with XSplit earlier today, and I didn't have time to troubleshoot. It was already making me late to the stream, so I just booted up Twitch Studio, and since I was already late, I didn't have time to really get the um, settings adjusted. So that's why there's a little green fuzzy and there's green paint under the tavern. I promise. And then my lights are not super set well. I'm like really red because I was running behind. So that's my fault. A lesson learned. But I'll give myself a little more time before stream in case we run into technical difficulties. But thanks for bearing with me. It's obviously not the best quality night. But anyway, just to kind of catch up where we were at in our the story. Um, to catch up where we were in our story. Um, you had Galen, Lawful, the builder of Dark Valley, the ruler of Dark Valley. You had Solaris, the Shining Paladin, textbook Arthurian knight, textbook paladin. Anything you think of a paladin, that was him. And you had Hawk, who was the opposite of that. He was the ultimate anti-paladin. Burn your wheat fields for no other reason than he could sort of purest of evils. Like I said, he came up to visit to heckle to cause, you know, because if Solaris was going to take the most courageous, then Hawk would make it his mission to track down the most treacherous, to always be a thorn. Like I said, Solaris got to knighthood 3 minutes before him, and he felt that his squire brother, when they were both squires, Galen, had it easier under their knight, who had apparently treated Hawk as like a pack mule and just basically ran it ragged. And while Galen sat on the carriage and drank the ale, and so there was some bitterness there. Really, uh, just wanted to set the stage for this final tale. And the last person you need to know, if you ever venture to our realms, or those of you who are in chat tonight who are from our realms, he now goes by Sir Brynjar. I am known as Saint Uriel. As we ascend from the darkness towards the top, sometimes we take on new names. Brynjar found the Viking way of life, and it was a huge change. But at these times, even his true name had been kind of blurred from history, because when we showed up, he was a man known as Raven. And now I want to let you know what you saw, even in real life, when you saw Raven. First off, Sir Raven, now known as Brynjar, uh, is an immaculate artisan of many, many crafts. The first thing I was ever told about him, and I was not told it by him, it was never really one to boast. He loves to show off his work. He loves to help you work on your projects, but he's not like boastful. He'd be like, "Oh yeah, I'm glad you appreciate this beautiful satin, doublet I've made." Raven was the type of person who, if he needed new court garb, um, he had just gotten stale in court from what he had been wearing in the past. He might take his nice satin sheets or curtains literally off the wall, sit down and stitch together garments that you couldn't tell what they came from. And like he has so many other things, but this is important to know because what you would have seen when you first showed up is somebody in super nice, soft black leather boots, striped black and gray breeches, but not puffy, just like a standard kind of almost a slack like pants. And then, he had a very dark kind of crimson overcoat, a vest almost, a jerkin over his black shirt. And he wielded, at this time, he went to other crafts, brewing, woodwork, so many other things. But at this time, he made the best, you know, weapons, the foam weapons that we use in the land, because we were still using PVC pipe, we were using heavier materials, and he had figured out how to counterweight them with hex bolts, using CPVC, lighter materials that still held up, and flat blades, would cut against the wind a lot better than like a rounder sword. So we made scimitars, and just like real life scimitars, these things they sung, they moved very quick, and they were for the year of our Lord 1996. They were fine blades. And now where Raven comes into this whole story is, he knows everybody involved. He has his connections. He's the brother-in-law of Solaris. Um, he's known Galen for a long time, uh, and Hawk is somebody has been friends with, and was friends with. Um, but he found himself in the land because he had married Solaris's sister. And when he saw us coming, Galen helped us, but it did not take Raven long. Like, while Shaden, who I talked about at the start of the Tory, um, stood by, Galen's side, and he tried his weapons. And he was a berserker. He was a barbarian. He would run out into the fields of battle and challenge the best fighters and die and die and die and lose and lose and lose. Injury after injury, he'd have to be brought back to the land of the living by the best healers. But he was going to get better at any means necessary. Raven noticed that, me, Abaddon, you know, we weren't skittish, we were not afraid to spar and learn, and we tried to be quick studies, but at the end of the day, like, we're not going to take a great sword out on the field. And so Raven took us under his wing. Raven took us, into the orphanage. We were these two stray teenagers, so we had nowhere to live, and so the orphanage was a place where we could work. And if we worked for Raven, he would forge us scimitars. He would teach us how to fight. He would teach us how to sew. Anything we wanted, he would teach. And honestly, it isn't much longer after this story where he would actually take to Squire Abaddon. Very early in Abaddon's career, it'd be much longer before I was squired, but that's neither here nor there. Um, but in true fantasy trope and true life trope, the thing about Raven's orphanage and his tutelages is oh, and I forgot to say, Raven. If you have seen Sting the wrestler, if you have watched the movie The Crow or know what a Harlequin is, um, Raven's face was often painted in whites and blacks like a Harlequin. So crimson reds, blacks, and grays, silent, soft boots. And his orphanage, where we would learn the tricks of the trade, much like him, to be entertainers. It was to be assassins. He knew, he could tell. We tried to work in tandem. We tried to take down bigger opponents in tandem, much like later, like in my first story, Abaddon would work with Adam to take down Derek Roth. And he knew what we could do that others couldn't do, because Solaris and his squires would stand firm on the battlefield, and you know, other dirty tactics might be used by Hawk when he was around, and the dwarves would beat their mighty drums. But here's the thing about the Dark Valley: before we built the walls and before the walls fell, it's lush with greenery at this point in history, and we were small, as I mentioned, and we did have no fear, and a bramble hurts less than a sword. So Raven saw what we originally did not see, and he taught us how to throw daggers, how to stay silent while the other one was loud, and how to be loud when the other was silent. And he would take us to the fields where we practiced. Um, Twice a week we practiced. We did skirmishes and stuff, and he'd take us to the fields under the guise of training us in the entertaining arts, throwing daggers, things like that. And we would learn every bush that had a cubby behind it, every hole. The sparring grounds were around a lake. Every ledge next to the lake, every dock you could hide behind it. We learned it inside and out. The two of us, we knew the bushes we could fit in. We knew only we could fit in them. We knew that the only other people small enough to fit in them was a squire by the name of Dumas, squire to Solaris. He would not run after two people with throwing daggers into the bushes. No, he would demand we come out and fight. Else Solaris would have his hide. We would, as we like to joke. And so this is where the small victories come in, and they really did add up. They added up because teams would be picked, and we would be last ones picked, because these aren't war grounds. These aren't turning grounds. This isn't a quest. The stakes are not high. The steel is blunted. You know, you skirmish and you train, and at the end of the day, you walk away. However, we were training for something more, and we would hide in the bushes when these skirmishes would happen. It wasn't hide and seek, but we would be in the bushes, or one of us would have our back turned. But Raven had taught us how to hear footprints and footsteps behind us, and how to keep it out of the eye of the periphery, just slightly at the side of our eye when someone was coming. So you'd stand as the other team near the flag if it was if that was the objective, or just out of the way. This quick, this defenseless, this easy kill. And as they approached my back, I had already been trained by Raven. I had already been putting in extra practices, and while Shaden was training how to do that one-on-one combat, I was training how to stand with no fear, turn around, mimic true fear on my face, as from the bushes, the small hole that we had pushed aside the leaves, 3 daggers would fly, the victory ours. Worst case scenario, if they were too fast before Abaddon could act, one of us was down. Take it to the healer, get him patched up. And we would run through the brambles. We would infuriate Solaris. And the thing to know is, like I said, at the time, Solaris never quite got to Warlord, but was always on the precipice in this era. Loved his one-on-one fighting, loved his honor and valor. So we were truly a thorn in the side because his brother-in-law, Sir Blade as he knew him, but we did not know his true name at the time, who would later be Brynjar, Raven had taught us everything is, and not out of animosity like Hawk had for him. That's why I talked of Hawk, but simply because it was funny. And now that's the thing, is you have to understand where Brynjar, where Blade, where Raven gets entertainment. Talking to others of crafts and how to craft things, working on projects, telling stories like the ones I'm telling now. But also, everybody wants to teach the new fighters how to pick up a sword, pick up a shield, and stand toe to toe. And if they put in 3 years on the ditch lines, if they put in their twice a days, if they do their push-ups and they eat their meat and they get all their protein, they'll grow up big and strong, and maybe one day they can win a tournament. But Raven always instinctively knew, for every Shaden, there was a Uriel, who at this time I was known as Sang, and an Abaddon. And he saw the type of people we were from the beginning, and he honed us into these killing machines. And now the small victory obviously wasn't getting the one-overs on people. Eventually we became known for that. And, even without Raven's tutelage anymore, we would continue to come up with tactics, with sneak attacks. Eventually that would morph into the fact that we learn how to skirmish. So we would learn how to lure out one person, and even if we were both fighting from the front, we'd know how to fight with each other. Like, he would swing, I would defend, we would flank. We had maneuvers that would come later in life. So I will talk much later about a sport called jugging, but I learned how to just on a touch of a shoulder know what to do. And we became deadly in this way. No, we weren't warlords. We weren't even up the path. And, a few years later, Abaddon would be working up the tournament road, and Shaden would be excelling up the tournament road. And, it'd be much longer before I actually felt the call to the tourney grounds. But in year one, there was no one worse. And at one point, they began splitting us on teams because eventually they stopped blaming themselves and started realizing that we had developed a true skill. And now, going back to Hawk, because he doesn't seem very relevant to the story, the reason for Hawk is a few months later, still within year one, Iron Keep comes up. They come up for a skirmish, a raid. Nothing deadly, just, we didn't tell you we were coming, but, you should always be ready, right? Let's have a fight. Solaris, you have honor, and, he had a signature move known as the Rising Step. You have your Rising Snap. You have your temples. Galen, you have your dwarves. Psyche, you have your magic. Iron Keep themselves was a very powerful, land at this time. And that's the thing you'll learn from these stories in the future is lands rise and they fall all the time. But at this time, they were a very powerful land. However, it was still evenly matched. We had a lot of people. They had brought a lot of people. Um, and finally, the sun was setting on the day. The fight had stretched on. Most people were exhausted, were defeated. You know, Solaris was flanked by Dumas, his young but really honorable squire on one side, and he was flanked on the other by his other squire, Jean-Pierre Dervais, one of the finest archers, like the one of the few archers in our land. Only like one archer, in my opinion, was better than him. And that man had the last name of Silverbow, but Jean-Pierre Dervais was deadly with a bow, a scout of renown. Hawk, stood at the other end of the grounds, and he's marching in, and he has a few more squires, and I don't remember which squires were with him, but I do keenly remember he had 4 squires to Solaris's 2, and they were marching. Arrows were volleyed. Eventually, arrows were loosed, and there's no more arrows, and they were walking towards each other, and they were walking, and Hawk sent forth his squires, and Solaris's squires rushed out to meet him, and they sparred and they volleyed, and at the end of the day, only Dumas was left, but he had been injured in the leg, so he could barely hobble. He was stuck in place, you know. So Hawk smirked, took a long final drag off his black cloven cigarette, stomped it out with a steel-toed boot, stepped forward. Solaris realized too late that Dumas was much closer to Hawk than to Solaris, and Hawk just in stride walked past the squire, thrust his sword down to the shoulder, and Dumas was smited. He was laying and he was bleeding. And now here you had it. Solaris knighted 3 minutes sooner. The shining paladin, the holy beacon, still probably one of the most honorable men to ever grace the fields. And the anti-paladin, the dark anti-paladin who would scorch the earth just because he could. Evil and good, what a storybook ending. They walked, the path was narrowing as they walked towards each other, each from their field. And they walked, and they walked, and they were about 10 feet apart, and they looked at each other. They grabbed their swords, they readied their shields. This would be a fight for the ages. And then with no noise, Hawk in his back feels the press of a dagger. And with no noise on the other side, Solaris, in the small of his back, feels the press of a dagger. For 2.5 hours, Abaddon and myself had sat in bushes. We'd sat in these trees. We knew where the armies were. We could see how we didn't think it would play out in such an epic way. That was luck. That was pure luck. But as the battle drew down, we're like, we're going to miss the whole battle, but we can still come out behind the winning side. But then it just played out in such a majestic way. The final battle of good and evil, and 2 lone assassins in their first year of the realm, trained by Raven, Harlequin face paint on, vanquished them both. And you might ask yourself, but weren't you both from Dark Valley? Wasn't Ironkeep the one invading? That is true. However, I did not mention at the start of my tale, Raven, also known as Blade, now known as Brynjar, his homeland was Ironkeep. But his current land, as at the time he was married to Solaris Silversword's sister, Kaya, was Dark Valley. So, as it ends, we walk back, and he could not be prouder of his 2 young pupils. And I think maybe this battle might be one of the reasons that he later squired Abaddon, who showed more drive and want to be a knight. It took me many years to even decide that knighthood was something I even wanted for myself. Though I would spend times as a man-at-arms, someone to fight, because I was by Abaddon's side for many, many years. So I would take his man-at-arms belt when he took the squire's belt to Blade, but that was because we fought as a pair in those early days. Again, no battle could have played out sweeter than that one, and that final battle is not even an embellishment. It was just pure luck. But at the end of the day, the real winner in the battle between Law and Chaos, Galen and Hawk, good and evil, Solaris and Hawk, the winner between the North Dark Valley and the South Iron Keep. Winner wasn't anybody. The winner, honestly, was Raven, now known as Brynjar, because he had taught two young kids how to utilize their talents for stealth to be able to take out stronger opponents. And that, to me, was the first big lesson I learned. And that's why I wanted to start these talks talking of small victories, because those small victories build victory after victory after victory. And while we won't get into the stories as we're out of time for today, that one victory would set in motion over the next decade, the next 2 decades, my rise to squire, my rise to knighthood, my rise to becoming king, the first king of the unified kingdoms, one of only 3 people ever sainted by Blackspire, defender of Blackspire, and archduke. It would lead to greater successes because I have never forgotten, even though now I fight with honor, now I hone my skills, I've never forgotten one very important lesson. And that lesson is every war is won starting with a victory. And if you look at the big picture and you try to strive too big, you're never going to get there. So small victories are, in fact, probably the most important thing to me, and really, I think, to anyone. So that's it. Those are my 3 stories I had put together for today. Um, I kind of loosely planned them out. I kind of wanted to see if I could still do storytelling as something in LARP. In the year before uh, COVID, I had started going to our arts and sciences competitions and Bardic arts. There's only very few people in. Oh, thanks, Unam. Thanks for the compliment on the story. There's very few people who actually kind of do Bardic arts. There is Aiden up in Inland Ocean plays beautiful music, and I'm going to miss some people, but like and then you have Kim Jin, who is, I mean, he's an amazing poet. But just kind of like storytelling um, and bardic arts, we have a couple singers. We have people who do that stuff, but like you know, want to push myself because, Unum, who's in the chat, and I actually mentioned you earlier, Unum, before the stories when somebody asked who is the best. I said there's a lot of people who are the best at a lot of things. Unum's the best at leather. Some people want to be known for their leather working and their armor, and they push themselves. Like I said, Brynjar is somebody who can do a vast array of arts and sciences. But for me, like the challenge to me is what I like to do, and obviously I became a Twitch streamer, a content creator for a reason. It's because I enjoy talking and putting together stories. So I was trying to push myself. So I did wing this a bit because if I was doing this at Amtgard by the Fire, if I was doing this at a Bardic, I would have maybe prepared more. But I think there's a certain element to improving parts of a story. If it's something you know really well in your memory and you've thought about it. So hopefully they came off well. Hopefully everybody actually enjoyed the stories. I'm happy to stick around for a little bit in case anybody has any feedback or anything like that. It was a really good, the engagement might have been lower than it was when I play games, but I mean, I do believe a lot of that is because there wasn't a lot of pauses or big pauses between the stories for me to talk with y'all. Because I was just going through the stories. I might modify it up, ask some questions, ask what you want to hear stories about, something like that. Be a little more engaging, I think, is something going forward. But I still did. A lot of people stuck around or at least listened to 1 or 2 stories, if not all of them. So I am this is something I'm going to probably do again. I'm not going to take the VOD itself, but I will probably be doing a storytelling series on my YouTube channel here in the next month as well. It's going to be a lot of the same stories you hear if you can catch the Twitch stream, and I will put the VOD up on my VOD YouTube. But I'm also going to kind of try to film these like outside by trees or things and like get a little more scenicness to it if I'm going to be putting it up on YouTube. But I'm definitely going to do this again. I'll post it around. I don't think right away it's gonna be something I slot in weekly, but I probably will end up doing it another few 2 weeks. I'm still trying to figure out my schedule of what games I want to stream, what people enjoy watching when I can stream. But this is definitely something I enjoyed doing, and since people did enjoy it. I'll definitely do it again. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, you've been around, but you've not been up here. And then there's other people that were like, like Lena Lynn and stuff, and people I saw in the chat who've been, they were in the Northwest, but they weren't around for, I believe the term that was used, the good old days. Um, but yeah, and honestly, when you have 25, well, not quite, but when you have almost 25 years of stories, like it's nice to share them with people because I think a lot of our history in Amtgard gets lost. We get a lot of new people who join. We get new stories and they're fun to tell. But I think it's really important to kind of share older stories. And I think, it shares camaraderie because, you know, sometimes, personalities clash and sometimes friends become enemies. And I think stories and memories, like, you should never turn a blind eye to an egregious offense, but a minor slight can be let go of with a bottle of rum and a couple stories. Like Brynjar, who I mentioned earlier, and Synthad, known as Belnorn at our game, basically buried the hatchet over beers and Viking stories because it was minor slights. It kind of started to spiral, but like stories are really powerful. Talking is really powerful. It's a really powerful way to like share with each other and communicate, and communication is really important. So. Oh, Topiro, hi, and thanks for stopping by. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it off, but if anybody has any other feedback or anything like that, go ahead and let me know. I'll stick around for a few more minutes. If not, those of you who know me, feel free to DM, or if you want to go ahead and DM me over Twitch. But this will definitely be something we schedule again. I'm probably gonna look at about 2 weeks out. And I'll probably put out a call and see if there's types of stories people want to hear, eras or themes. I just wanted to start with little victories because that's what I like to teach. That's what I truly believe is, you don't become the best crafter in the land by making a suit of fluted Gothic plate metal. You become the best metalsmith of the land by making a nail, a horseshoe. So little victories are important. So. Yeah, I do. I launched it a while ago and then I took a break, so I relaunched it. Um, I do have a Patreon. Thanks, I guess pointing it out to be mentioned. If people do want to support, I do have a Patreon. Everything you can find me everywhere: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just Loctavian00. I do have a Patreon. Um, I think stories and things like that, and asking people about stories will be something I add to there. But right now, it's just like if people want to contribute, that's great. If not, that's fine as well. But yeah, if you want to like add me on any social media, you can find me at Loctavian00 everywhere but Facebook because Facebook, uh, I had Loctavian00 as a personal URL. I changed it to something else so I could use it as a professional URL. And now 6 months later, it still won't let me. So on Facebook, I'm Loctavian 00, but on Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, Twitch, Discord, it's Loctavian00, number 0001. So feel free to follow me, reach out, DM me anywhere. You know, really enjoy doing the streaming thing and love to hear from people. So gonna keep doing. I'm not sure if I'll stream tomorrow. I'm not sure when I'm going to the beach. Like I said, I'm gonna try to get out with my partner and my kids, my fur kids to the beach. But nights where we're not gonna be out of town, I'm gonna be doing more game streams. I think we're gonna do a little Elder Scrolls Online next, maybe Destiny too. So anyway, everybody have a good night. Thanks again for stopping by. Really was fun telling stories with y'all, and I'll try to refine it in the future so that it's even more enjoyable and more engaging. All right, have a good night, everybody.